Hi, I'm Vanessa Couto here talking about astrology and career. This is a topic very much close to my heart because ever since I was a kid and I sort of kind of discovered astrology, or astrology discovered me, I was very interested in what sort of made people tick, but also very interested in what was I here to do. So it really became a personal journey for me in looking at as I learned about my own chart, how to weave that in. So what was I here to do? What was my purpose? Also, in some ways, for me as well, astrology and career became, especially in the last year, as I sort of launched myself into full-time as an astrological coach, a way for me to understand better how could I position myself as a business, as a solopreneur. So in some ways, I'm talking about career as sort of your job, where you go, but also career in the sense of how do you set up yourself as a business in a way, especially if you're a solopreneur. And in some ways too, in this day and age, I think we see career, it's not just we apply for a job and we get a job and all goes well, hopefully. In some ways, we're marketing ourselves. We're having to brand ourselves in some ways. So to me, I like to look at the chart as a way to discover sort of our strengths and weaknesses, all that good stuff, but also how to work with it in a sort of more in-depth way, and also to bring us some images that will help us on that journey of, what are we here to do, really? And And also, I think of career and business and all that. It's really a heroic journey. It's a call to adventure. And I think a lot about the idea of today, in this day and age, we think about job, we think about the business, career, but it has a lot to do with this idea of vocation, of purpose. And vocation, coming from Latin, vocatio, means to call. It's a summons. And to me, that's sort of the call to adventure, like, as in Joseph Campbell's The Heroic Journey. And in some ways, too, this comes from when I was a child. I remember going to Sunday school and sort of hearing the story of how, God could call you to something, greater. And I think I might have been 5 or 6, and I was really enthralled with that idea that, my God could call me for something. And I think for a couple of years after that, I was really entranced with that idea. And growing up later on in high school and everything else, I started to see this idea that whatever I was going to do in the world had to be an answer to a call. And what I didn't quite realize in those younger years was that call was really a summon from my deeper self. That the way that my deeper self wanted to express itself in the world was through my work. And so that was part of my own personal journey and why that's an area of astrology that I so love. And I'm just kind of giving a little bit of a sort of philosophical backdrop to this. And it tends to be in many ways the philosophy that I approach my astrological counseling work is that when we are born, we're sort of given this essence. We have this sort of inner nature. And in some ways, and I think one of the main points we look at is the sun for that. It's not the only one, but definitely an entry point. And it reflects an individual aspect of the divine. We are an expression of the sort of, in my mind, the way I see it is the collective consciousness of Gaia consciousness. Whatever it is for you, in some ways we are expressing something through us. And it also, to me, it's a two-way thing too, that we try to make it into a whole. So it's not just making our own whole birth chart in full expression, but together, each one of us, as we express our sort of calling in the world, we kind of create a bigger picture, a whole picture. And what I like about this quote from Howard Sportis, which is one of my favorite astrologers. Unfortunately, he already passed away, but I love his books, is that he says that there's a little bit of responsibility here, that in some ways we have to kind of get engaged in this adventure. We sort of have to become conscious, and the choices we make kind of grow into what we're here to become. And so that the whole chart is a clue to this vocation, to this career. Or if you're thinking of looking at your own birth chart from a sort of a business perspective, let's say you're setting up a business, you've got your astrology practice or whatever it may be, you can look at your whole chart as sort of a huge clue to how can you kind of create that in the world. And then the other quote I love too, and I think for me, this has been the expression of my own journey in career and in creating my own business, is that, yeah, we all have some sort of talent. Everybody's got something. But the rare thing is the courage to follow that talent to the dark places where it leads. So that's Erica Jong. And to me, that is so true, because I think once we really embark, when we answer the call to this adventure to really follow the career or create the business that makes our heart sing, it will lead us into sort of a spiritual journey in some ways. I often tell friends of mine that trying to set up your own business or change career, a complete sort of shift, is a spiritual journey in a way that I never thought it would be. Because as you go on this, you're kind of called to really look at the places you haven't fully explored. And so the dark places here could mean the challenges we have, the blockages we have. So I kind of see that when we're looking at the chart, we can see where those blockages may be. So the other thing too I've noticed in part of this sort of spiritual journey towards career is that the way we work, the profession we kind of follow, or the business we create, in some ways, and I really like this quote from Faye Kossar, she has an excellent book on astrology and career, is that work is usually the best way of working through and making use of one's psychological difficulties. And it should connect us, it should connect as many aspects of the individual's psyche as possible. Before I completely shifted careers, I used to work in a law firm, pretty big law firm, and it was really interesting where they often preached in a way that we needed to separate the personal from business. You know, you had to leave the personal outside. And I understood where they were coming from, but the thing that really struck me was that whenever you looked at the situation that was showing up through the clients or your coworkers or your bosses, there was so much personal stuff being worked through that very job, that very career. So in some ways, I think that's the challenge we have, but it's also an adventure where our psychological difficulties and challenges and perhaps pain or wounds that we have really get worked through the kind of career we choose, the kind of business we decide to open. So in some ways, not only is it a spiritual journey, but it puts all the therapy you may have done in the past to the test. I often say it's like, wow, I thought I might have resolved this issue, and here it is again. So it just really makes the chart come alive if you're really engaged in sort of the search for the vocation. And so my goal here is to explore in today's talk mainly the planets, because it'd be lovely to explore everything, but there's so much to cover. But just to kind of open for discussion and kind of give you some food for thought. So in my own experience, when I was creating my business and then kind of seeing clients coming with similar issues around career, around wanting to turn a hobby into a business, or trying to, make a complete pivot of career choice, I really started looking at the sun more closely. In my own experience, I think for a while, I kind of sort of like let go of the sun a little bit. Oh, it's sun sign astrology, but let's look at everything else. But I really kind of went back to the simplicity of looking at the sun And I like this because even if someone has not had their chart done or doesn't know astrology, it's a way to enter into this search, into this journey. And so the sun is as basic to me as it gets, although it's a simple question, it's not a simple, might not be such a simple way to find the answer, is what makes you happy? You know, what makes you shine? What makes you feel like you are alive? That in some ways represents your sense of vitality, right? Not just in your personal life, but when you're shining that light. And more, I reflect on the sun as sort of, yes, you're born with the sun in Gemini or Taurus or Sagittarius. In some ways, you are that sun sign, but you're also becoming more fully that sign. And so for me, the sun really represents the heroic journey of what we are becoming. And of course, this will come through career or the business, because it's also the DNA that we carry through. And so I see the sun representing the heart and essence of what you want in life. So when you think about your career or where you tend to shine more, or also if you're thinking of a business or creating a business, I like to think of the sun as sort of the DNA, the essence of that business, of your creative endeavor, right? And also in some ways, I look at the sun, in this case, looking also at the sun sign, of course. How can you feed your heart's desires? What is it needed? What does it really need? So just keep it simple. So I think of the sun sign, how do you need to feed that, your heart's desire? And the house that the sun is in is where you may feel that you can more easily find that, or it's more sort of a no-brainer in a way. Of course, there are challenges in all of that, but if you just keep it simple, where is it in your life that you find yourself shining? The other element I think about, especially if you're having, if you will, a sort of a crisis in career, or you're wanting to change, or you're creating a business, you're birthing a business, it's interesting how some of these family issues come out. And I think of the sun as, what was the relationship of the father figure in your life in relationship to career or business? What are some of the stories and myths that came through? Beliefs around, or if you will, limiting beliefs around that. So many stories we hear of, like the son wanted the child to be a doctor and the child has to become a doctor, that sort of thing. So perhaps looking at the sun and the other aspects that the sun has with other planets, and the story, doing a little bit of psychological investigation in your own family story to look at, what was the father's story? Was the father figure, happy in his career? Was, fulfilled? Was he successful in business or not? And how these things may also be playing out in your own life, especially, I think, if you're birthing a business. I think these issues really come to the forefront. And then I like to look at the ascendant. And the ascendant, of course, is sort of the front door of the house of your psyche. It's how you come across, how people perceive you. But in some ways, too, I think of the ascendant, especially if you think of yourself, you're a solopreneur, you're creating a business that has to do with you're the face of that business, or your career when you're trying to get out there and get a job and really sort of update your resume or make a change. I think of the ascendant as sort of the outer packaging of who you are as a employee, a possible employee, or a business. How are you packaging that? What's the first impression? And I think that could go from the impression of your resume, how you come across, the way it looks and feels, but also if you're the solopreneur face of a business, what's your website like? What is the business card that you have? How you kind of outer packaging you as a product, if you think of it that way. And so it has to do with how others are seeing you or your business and service. What's the expression of that? And for me personally, it was quite a discovery to see this, because I was kind of doing it unconsciously, but once I sort of really got conscious of it, I really made much more use of my ascendant to give it a sort of a feeling tone, a sort of a structured and physical tone to my own business. So it goes from the kind of paper I chose for my business card to the sort of things, the images I use. And also, too, I think the ascendant, in some ways, when you're thinking about your career, what you want to birth in the world, it speaks to me to what is it that needs to take shape in the world. There's a sense of making things take a physical form in a way, something that it's not just in your mind, it's out there in the world. So if you're a writer or a creative, something that at least in the end you have, if you will, something to hold in your hands. I like to think of it that way, what wants to be birthed and take shape in the world. And of course, I also think that the ascendant helps us see what is the road, what's the traffic like for the journey of the sun, how you're driving, right? What kind of car you're driving. And so that will determine how you need to sort of move about in the world. And then the midheaven, I think it's many things. It's heavily explored. It's still somewhat misunderstood in many ways too. And I still feel myself getting to learn more and more what the midheaven stands for. But when I think of the midheaven as sort of the purpose of my chart, if I want to keep it really simple, of course, you got to look at everything else. But if that's all you got, this will already give you some inclination, is kind of where you're heading. What's sort of the mission that's driving you? I also think from a business perspective is what kind of reputation you want to have. What do you want to be known for, really? So if you think of yourself as an employee or a business owner, and you're creating a service or you're engaging in a project at work, you want to think, okay, how do I want to come across? What do I want to be known for? Am I the kind of person who's revolutionary and unique? Am I the one who's really organized? I want to make people feel that, they work with me, this is what they get. And in some ways, it's kind of what stands out in you, even when you're not kind of really thinking about it. And in some ways, getting to know your midheaven better gives you clues to what sort of aspirations are moving you forward, right? So to me, once I sort of started thinking of my own chart and how it could help me in my career, in my business, it really illuminated the path for me, made more sense. What I was doing unconsciously started to become more clear. And then we have the moon, and a whole sort of workshop could be done just around the moon. And in some ways, when I think about, especially in the times where I was challenged in my career, my old career, was to learn to look at the moon to see what are the emotional and psychological needs that I needed to fulfill. And because we often tend to think that, you got a great career, you have a good salary, this is wonderful, but perhaps your moon is just not getting any of it. It's not being fulfilled emotionally. Or you could be in a job that is considered, not that great, but your emotional needs are being fulfilled. So I think once we know our moon sign and we look at it, it really fleshes out where my needs being met or not. And the other thing too, that for me, it's still sort of a learning journey for me, is that by doing the moon and by paying attention to what nourishes my moon, it is actually helping me feed my sun to keep it on its journey. So I think that's really important. And it revolves a lot around self-care for me. And it's not just a personal thing, because if you're a business owner, you have to learn your boundaries and your self-care. But also if you're in a very demanding job or your career, how do you nourish your moon so you can keep going? So those elements, and where is it in your job, let's say, in your company, where are the elements where your moon is being sort of nourished? Now, what I've also learned is in just my inexperience in working with clients as well, especially if you're creating a business, looking at your own moon does really help you to understand the kind of clients you're going to tend to attract, the sort of public you're going to, be dealing with. And, or perhaps it helps you get a glimpse to the kind of public you want to work with. What are their needs? And so I think in some ways there is a correlation between our own personal moon and what is it that we're trying to help and sort of nourish in others as well. So it's kind of the same thing. We need to nourish ourselves as often what others are needing to be nourished. It also speaks to the environment. So if you're thinking of work, what kind of environment that, will make you feel nourished or secure? It has a lot to do with security. And probably you would look at the moon to see why perhaps you're not leaving a job that's going nowhere, but there's a sense of security. So that helps you investigate that a little further. And for me, the issue of mother, or, the mother figure, and career and business pretty much deserves a whole other workshop by itself. And what I have found, and this is kind of a hypothesis I have, is that especially if you're birthing a business or changing a career or trying to really do something that is your thing, to look at the relationship you had with your mother or your mother figure, the main, mother figure. Because I have seen a sort of a correlation between the challenges around creating something that's your own with issues around mothers. So it's a good also sort of psychological, archaeological dig in your own family to see what was the story around the female line. Perhaps questions such as, was your mother fulfilled in her career? Did she have a dream that she couldn't do and now it's kind of coming down to you? What were the challenges around that? Or perhaps the strengths? It's not always negative, but to look at that, and I think there's a huge correlation. And of course, then you look at your birth chart and see where's the moon, the location of the moon, the aspects of the moon will give you more of an indication. And then Mercury, I think Mercury is so much more, but whenever we're looking at Mercury, it tends all to come down, boil down to communication. But I think when you're looking at your career, what you're getting across, I've seen a lot of the satisfaction, personally for me, but also in other colleagues and clients, a lot of the satisfaction when people are not feeling like they're being heard or understood. And I'd like to look at Mercury when that kind of pops up. And so in some ways, look at Mercury, the way you sort of process data and how you communicate is sort of the interpreter that we have between our inner world and the outer world. It's the way we communicate. So difficulties in communication at work could, look at Mercury. And I think especially if you're thinking about changing your career or you've opened your business and all that stuff, Mercury will give you an indication of how can you network, or how do you best network, how do you best build bridges and connect with others. And the other element too, because often Mercury is very close to the sun, and you can have issues around, I am what I think, or maybe it's not, maybe not, especially if Mercury is in a different sign. But looking at the issue of perhaps your thoughts, the way your mind is processing or making ideas up in your head, how is that affecting your career or your expression of your business? And the other element of Mercury, I think, is to kind of have a reflection on look at the sign it's in, the aspects it has, especially if it's aspects with the outer planets. What wants to be expressed through you? What wants to come through you? I think that's an interesting way to look at it as well, and see if you're finding any way to have that expressed in your career. Then too, on a more sort of psychological level, you can look at Mercury and look at your own relationship with your siblings, if you have siblings. And perhaps even if perhaps you didn't have siblings, but you were close to your cousins or anything like that, they almost had a sibling-like relationship. And look at that, and look at your relationship with coworkers and colleagues. I think it's an interesting way to explore that as well. What themes or patterns are popping up? If you have gone from job to job, and it's always like you have competitive coworkers or challenging coworkers, or even really lovely coworkers, this could be an area to explore your own relationship with your siblings. Now, Venus, I think Venus is more and more, I reflect on Venus and the idea of joy and pleasure, because a lot of people, I don't know what's the statistics really, the percentage, but it's often said that a lot of people don't really like their jobs. So I feel in some ways we have sort of a crisis brewing, in a way, where if you think of the large majority of people not really having any pleasure in their job, I think that will make for a very angry Venus. And on the other hand, when you're thinking about shifting careers or creating a business, a lot of the eros, the sort of erotic drive to do this, has to do with Venus and her search for where's my pleasure? I want to have pleasure and joy in what I do. She also has a lot to say about, of course, the talents that we naturally have. And I think of talents here in a way as the things that we do for pleasure, that we just simply do. And because we are in joy when we're doing it, we become attractive. It becomes sort of a natural talent. So also to look at Venus, and where are you getting some sense of joy in your own career and job. Now, when you're thinking of yourself as looking at your chart from a business point, you can think of Venus, not only what is it that you like to do, so that you might as well do that because you will naturally do it anyway, is how can Venus in your chart help you create the types of services or products that you would like to offer. So you can think of this from your business. You're a solopreneur, you're creating something. What is it that you like to do, and kind of fashion a product around that, or a service. And of course, you look at the aspects that Venus has. Where is she in your chart to flesh it out? But also, if you're just, trying to shift jobs and all that, think of the kinds of services, even if it's not officially described, that you can offer your employer. Look at your Venus as how can you make yourself, perhaps, to use a Venus sort of adjective, attractive at work, as in a person who could be, up for promotion. How could you best use your Venus to help in that case, how to grow in your career? And of course, Venus is often talked about in terms of wealth. And I think this is where the correlation between joy plus pleasure equals attractiveness, in which thus leads to wealth, however you understand wealth. It could be money, it could be wealth in abundance of friends and sort of a rich network, and whatever it is that you understand as of success. So look at Venus. So I think often Venus is sort of the unsung heroine of the chart, and we tend to sort of perhaps bypass her a little bit. And as of now, she's retrograde, so it's a good time for us to reflect on Venus and what she has to offer for us. Now, Mars is interesting. It's how you kind of go after what you want. And you're, in some ways, is the sort of the warrior side of yourself, the competitive spirit. And if you think of in your job, or, how do you jockey for position, and how do you feel to, perhaps, if your job or your business gives you enough room to exercise the Mars that you have. when where is Mars? What sign and aspect, of course, will give you more of an inclination of how you want to express that spirit. And maybe sometimes competitiveness is not something that we can sort of talk too much at work, but it's all there. So I think knowing our Mars helps us understand, especially a way for us to give it a place to have take action. Otherwise, it can come out in a sort of its shadow aspect and be much more challenging. I think it speaks a lot to how you get things done, how you like to get things done. And it gives you a sense of what is it that you're fighting for. So what is it that makes you, to me, get up in the morning and say, this is what if I had to choose a camp banner in which I'm fighting under, that's Mars. Especially too, I think, if you're fashioning a business, what kind of causes that make you sort of stand up? What kind of drives you? I think looking at Mars will help quite a bit, have an understanding of what gives vitality to your business. And Jupiter more and more, I think about Jupiter in terms of the storyteller in our inner psyche. It gives us a sense of meaning. What is it that gives us a sort of a philosophical sense of meaning? So you could be in a great job, everything is wonderful, but it feels meaningless. I think that's when we look to Jupiter to help us guide us towards what gives us meaning. I think Jupiter also helps us see our story. How do we tell our story to the world and to ourselves? Also the attitude that you bring to work. Are you more philosophical? That kind of, what's your attitude towards things at work and in your business? It helps you be more strategic, have a bigger picture, see the big picture. And one thing about Jupiter I've noticed, especially if you're fashioning, you're birthing a business, to look at Jupiter as sort of your main marketing guy, in a way that if you think of how do you portray yourself in the world? What is the story you're telling to the world of you as a service, or perhaps as the product that you're selling, or whatever the product is? I think Jupiter helps you fashion that story, is the storyteller of your chart. And so I think if you want to sort of brand yourself, if you will, how do you package yourself for a new career or a business? Look to Jupiter to help you see the big picture, be more strategic. And I think when we are able to, quote unquote, do Jupiter, we are able to sort of have a sense of meaning, and it gives us a sense of buoyancy, perhaps, to keep going. Of course, all of this is sort of general ideas, but just to give you some food for thought. And Saturn, good old Saturn. I think Saturn is often described as, where the blockages are. It's where the angels fear to tread, or it's where it kind of inhibits us a little bit. But what I have learned from exploring Saturn in my own life and looking at it in clients' lives is that Saturn points to the sense of what is it that we feel responsible for? And it gives us a sense of devotion or discipline. And I see discipline here as how can we be the disciple of ourselves? And there's something to be said about the consistency and the discipline of Saturn that I feel that of course, it helps us sort of work through and perfect what we need to, so that we can sort of become the authority of whatever it is that we're trying to do. And it's interesting to me because sometimes just in general conversations, we think that Saturn, we don't want to go there. We want to do Venus, we want to do Mars, we want to do the moon and the sun, of course. But there's something about if you're in a job, let's say, where, you don't have a lot of responsibility, or perhaps the boundaries are very loose. There is no sense of structure. There's no consistency. There's no sense of who's the authority. I think these are all point toward the lack of Saturn, that can actually be quite problematic. It might be a huge dissatisfaction. And so look to your Saturn in your own birth chart to help you see perhaps where is it that you're working towards being an authority, in the sense of being the author of something. And I often like to also think about Saturn as sort of the canvas, the size of the canvas from which that I can paint. This is the size. Let's say it's 14 by 11 inches. That's the size. This is the space. This is the boundary I'm working with. And in some ways, I feel that Saturn gives us that boundary. The size of the canvas helps us actually create. Of course, too much pressure will stifle our creativity. But I think of Saturn as, what is the container that you have in your career or perhaps in your business to help you create? What is the structure? So for an example, a lot of people at work, I had this a lot in my previous job, where a lot of people were known to leave things to the very last minute. There was something about that container for them that made them work. But then once I moved into becoming a solopreneur, it has been a journey in understanding how Saturn can help me create the container, the structure of my business, not just of my calendar, but how I create the packages, what are my boundaries, where is the geography, the landscape of that. So I think there's a lot to be said about Saturn. And lastly, I'd like to say that I feel in many ways when we do Saturn, there's something about work already, very naturally sort of married into Saturn, this idea of work and Saturn. But I think out of that comes the idea that Saturn can be the midwife for our own creativity, because I feel like it's the container, it's the canal from which something can be birthed through. I think especially if you have Saturn, let's say with Uranus or Neptune, as we had all last year, Saturn, Neptune dancing together, Pluto, something's being birthed through. So I think of one way to reflect on Saturn in your own birth chart is to see it as, what is the container, what is trying to be birthed through. And just to touch a little bit on the other planets, we have Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. It's kind of an explosion of colors. They are generational, so I think it's really interesting to look at your own chart to see what is the zeitgeist of your generation. What does it mean? And explore the themes of your generation, the position of each one of these and whatever sign they're in relation to where do you stand within your generation in terms of what are you bringing to the world in terms of your service to the world, your career or the business. And then, of course, look at these in relationship to the personal planets. Like I was saying before, Saturn and Neptune, one way for me that I found of working through that was to see Saturn as the container through which the inspiration of Neptune could come through. So in some ways, Saturn was a way to create the sort of the discipline, the consistency from which the creative muses of Neptune could come through. Or perhaps looking at Saturn and Uranus and looking at how can you be sort of both the revolutionary and yet keeping the status quo? How are you an innovator without throwing out the baby out with the bathwater? And of course, Pluto, the structure, the power. So those I invite you to sort of look more in relationship to your personal planets, especially because I feel with the outer planets, there's something bigger that wants to come through us, and sort of we become the container, the channel for that. And it's really interesting, especially if you're creating your own business, to look at these to see what is actually coming through your service. Maybe you're thinking all you're doing is selling paintings, but there's much more going on. And then just to sort of, if there's anything to all, if you forget everything else, but one thing that you can walk away and trying to remember, and especially if you know your birth chart, and sort of something to go back to help you, is if you look at your sun sign, your ascendant, and your midheaven, that kind of equals the promotion trinity, in the sense that this is especially true if you're trying to market yourself, you're creating, or you want to build a new website for your services or products. If you just want to stick to sun, ascendant, and midheaven, that will already give you an idea of what sort of images you could use, what sort of colors, what kind of things you're trying to bring forth. You can do a little bit of due diligence around that. And it also, in some ways, let's say you're rewriting your resume and you're going for a kind of different job. Look at your sun sign, your ascendant, and midheaven, and kind of that gives you a gist of the essence of your career profile. So the sun is the essence, the heart of what you're trying to bring forth. The ascendant is sort of the packaging of what you're doing. And the midheaven is what you're going for, what you're aiming. So finding ways you have the keywords to even express or infuse let's say your resume or your cover letter with that could help too. Or if you're going to go talk to your boss about a change or promotion, you can think about that if you're sort of career rebranding, as they say. So I think these three, the sort of the pyramid of, these three elements of the chart already will give you a lot of stuff to work with. And of course, in the end, an unfulfilled vocation drains the color from a man's entire existence. It's a little bit dramatic, but it really makes me think about that when we don't, or we can't really find a way to express our own calling. There's something, it feels something is out of whack in our own lives. Something's out of balance. It lacks color, right? So I just thought this quote was really interesting to just kind of think about, in a way, motivate us to go forward. And of course, you can find me on my website, Vanessa Couto, but I know we're going to take a look at a chart right now. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen right now. Okay. Everybody there?
Yes, thank you so much, Vanessa. That was absolutely amazing. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So beautiful. Your artworks are so beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you.
So would you like me to go grab Priya's chart? Because I thought you would have...
I have it here too.
Okay. Would you like to share your screen again then?
Sure, yeah.
Thank you.
All right, can you see the chart?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so if Priya wants to give me a little background, what's going on?
Hi, Vanessa.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning. What would you like to know?
So, yeah, what's your career question? What's coming up for you?
A little bit lost, actually. So I was hoping for some guidance.
Mm-hmm. What are you doing right now? What is it that you work?
I teach yoga.
Okay.
I'm hoping to switch to something else like writing.
Writing? Do you already do some writing on the side?
Very little. Yeah, I do.
You do. What kind of stuff do you like to write?
Inspirational stuff, uplifting, something liberating, something that can give people back their serenity, things like that.
And how long have you been teaching yoga?
A few years.
A few years now?
Yeah.
Do you still like it, or are you kind of, I want a complete change?
Yeah, I think I feel like I want to change.
You want to change?
Yeah.
I have to say, when I looked at your chart, the first thing that struck me is, Sun, Neptune together. And then looking at the moon together with Pluto. So I feel there's big things that want to come through you in a way. But when I see, and also the Sun and Neptune and Jupiter as well, in the fifth house. So to me, there's something a real yearning. It's not just a desire or a need. It's a yearning to create something that has your DNA in it, you know. So when I think of, when you said writing, I think, oh, something that will have your own unique way of expressing that. And I think when I see Sun Neptune, I think and I think you already said it, the challenge is the boundaries are so foggy, right? It's so how do I give it a container? And I can see with Sagittarius, right in the beginning of Sagittarius, correct? Yeah. There's a yearning for something that's philosophical, religious, big, an adventure.
Yeah.
But then when I looked, and it got me struck too, is the Sun Pluto, Moon Pluto in Virgo, in the very last degrees of Virgo. And I'm thinking that one way to, although it may sound challenging at first, I feel like the Sun in Sagittarius wants to move, right? It wants to keep going big and large. That Moon in Virgo is kind of saying, no, we gotta mind the details. We gotta mind the details. And so in some ways, what it made me immediately think is, how can you create the container, sort of the daily ritual of how to bring this vision into being? My inkling is to say, in doing the Moon, you can kind of help that Sun Neptune sort of bring forth that vision. And there's something about the Moon Pluto, like I was saying in the presentation, you know, looking to the stories, especially through your mother's line, the female line of the family, and looking at that Neptune Sun, looking at the father side of the family, to exploring that, doing sort of your own family line archaeology to see what are some of the themes that are coming through that may also be clues to your situation now. But I and also the other interesting thing I found in your chart is that the relationship between the Sun and Moon, sort of that last quarter moon. I like to look at the lunar phases to give me a little bit more information about how am I emotionally approaching something. And I think in looking at being a last quarter moon, I would wonder, what are the inner voices really saying within you that's kind of like cooking in the back burner that wants to find some sort of expression? I have found in some of my clients who have a last quarter moon, and in my own experience as well, it almost comes a point in life that really what you're wanting to create is something that's uniquely yours, that has your, almost like you have to create the platform, the container for you to sort of step on and share with the world what you're here to teach. And so I would think that Sun Neptune has strong vision, and you should be you want to write inspiration, you have something that you can give your personal stamp on it. But I think one way to do it is through that moon, by the daily discipline of doing it, you know, the little bits, baby steps, right? I think Virgo brings in this energy of baby steps. And then I look at your rising sign in Cancer, and again, to me, it's emphasized the sense of doing things with a certain flow, and I would say the lunar flow. So I would play around with looking at, observing, what are the points in which you feel more creatively called, or the muses come to you to like, okay, I want to write. What is that creative flow to you like, you know? And I would try to tap into that. Find your own creative sort of rhythm. And then when I look at that midheaven, which is in Aries, to me, there's a strong drive to be a pioneer, to break through, be the first. And so I wonder how that could be part of your own place and story within your own family, perhaps. You know, are you going to be the one doing something different? What are the emotions around that? And I think you also had, you know, Saturn already is, you know, leaving. The end of the year will leave Sagittarius. So you've gone through the pressure cooker already of that sort of the thumb on you, you know, pressing you down a little bit, but kind of giving you, if you look at the last couple of years or last year, how much of perhaps the experience being in the outer world giving you some blockages or a sense of dissatisfaction or a sense of being closed in might have been hints of how you could tap inward and be like, okay, what is it that gives me joy? How deep can I go? How's that landing for you?
Yeah, it sounds good.
Yeah, I think I would explore, in some ways I would say simply, try to do that moon, go deeper into that moon. I mean, you do have Moon and Pluto and Uranus all in the third house, you know, traditional houses of communication and writing. And then you have all those planets in the fifth. Again, you kind of called to create something that's yours.
And what about Mars being in the very close to IC? I mean, it's lording the MC, but it's so close to IC. Does it like say that I'm like not so keen on being out in the world, or what is it?
I think, you know, I think Mars here to me speaks to your drive, you know, how you're going to go after it. It's sort of in the fourth house, yes, and it's so technically, quote unquote, kind of, you know, hidden there in the home, but it's in Libra. So to me I would ask the question, what's your impulse to relate, you know, or perhaps, I don't think so much as there are many people who have very public lives and have a lot of planets in the bottom of the chart. But I think there's something that to me doesn't mean that, but I think perhaps tap into that Mars and what is the inner, that drive, or explore too, again, the themes around the family, because it's in the fourth house. So what is the drive in the home? Right now you're having Jupiter so close to Mars as well, you know, Jupiter traveling through your whole fourth house. So what could be coming to the surface around these themes of you, like, oh, I feel lost, I don't know what to do, but I want to write. Is this something that, for an example, was it encouraged in your upbringing to write, to be creative?
Really, I was given a free hand to do as I please, where education and career was concerned.
So you were sort of encouraged then.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so I think I would explore that. So look at Mars in the fourth and I would tap then, what is the thing that's driving you to do this? Or perhaps because it's in Libra, then it feels like it's caught between two things. What are the choices? What choice do I make?
Yeah.
And so perhaps the dance here is around, is it too much compromising even perhaps with yourself, with the situation you're in, and not exercising enough that Mars, you know, letting it out?
Yeah, it's like about, do I follow my principles, or do I like also think about making a living, you know, things like that, maybe?
But then I would say, and why couldn't be both? It's in Libra.
Yeah.
Once you find a compromise, I would think about that. But, you know, I am pulled to the Moon and Pluto in a way. Something about that to me, because they're so close, and of course that Sun Neptune, feels to me something needs to go deeper, dig deeper to it.
Very, yep. That is why I'm like very much haven't been concerned about my career. I've been more concentrated about what's going on inside and like spirituality and things like that.
Yeah. And maybe use that where your own journey through your own inner landscape, use that as the creative sort of fire, wood for your creative writing.
Okay.
You could be taking your journal, you could journal more, you could explore that, find a creative way to do it in some ways that brings you joy, right? So looking at that Venus in Scorpio, you for sure don't like anything. You like things with a sense of depth, right? At least depth.
Yeah. And it gives me more joy when there is like someone reading at the other end. So like journaling is something that I never did. I always had to have someone that I was writing to. Only then the words would flow out. If I was writing for myself, it was like, I would just rather just think it in my head.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, maybe it might not be journaling, but maybe it could be you're writing a memoir, where it will have a reader. Maybe journaling is too intimate. It just might be the process. But I think bringing in some sense of consistency, the daily practice, might help you flesh it out. Because I think one of the dangers of Sun Neptune is, especially in Sagittarius, the vision is so big that it's like I want to climb the Himalaya, but I didn't even buy the backpack, So I think that Virgo is like, okay, let's go to the hiking store first, see the equipment, get a map. It's possible, and so in some ways, I think I would call on that Saturn, because you do have Saturn up top in the chart. And so to me, in some ways, and it's aspecting Venus, and also in some ways does do Venus, but Jupiter, I think the craft of the discipline. Okay, so if you think of Venus, what is it that you enjoy? And Saturn, I think in some ways is saying, how can you make that a craft, a daily discipline? Personally, for me, working with Saturn, whenever I engage with Saturn from the perspective of discipline, it always helps me. I may go kicking and screaming, but eventually in the end, I feel like that was the best decision I made. So I think when we in creativity like that, and when you're feeling lost, bring it back to the home, in a way of what can you do that's close in. Start close in. This is a British poet called David Whyte, and the first line of one of his poems is start close in. Start with the step you don't want to take. And whenever I'm feeling kind of, I don't know what to do, I remember that line from his poem to help me sort of get back into, okay, I think I know what I'm doing now. I think reflect on these. But you got the potential there. There's something definitely creative that you're going to bring forth. It's really now you creating the container for you to birth that, allow that Neptune to sort of come through. Because whenever you, especially whatever aspects you have with the sun, if you think of the sun as the creative DNA what you're bringing into the world, whatever planet is near the sun or aspecting the sun needs to have a voice as well. And in your case, you got Neptune right there, so it really needs to be expressed. So when you're welcoming, think of yoga, right? The pose is a way for us to hold the container for a certain kind of energy.
Yes.
And so in some ways you can bring that philosophy into your creative endeavor.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Well, I hope this helps. That keeps us posted on your writing. We need those inspiration out there.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, thank you both very much.
Thank you.
back to the panel now. And so, Vanessa, thanks so much. That was amazing.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. This was great.
Oh, so any questions from anybody or comments?
I'll just say, this is Wendy. I really, I appreciated all your quotes. I love that one by Erica Jong. I remember writing it out, and I'm also a big Joseph Campbell and 10th house person with 10th house stuff. So, yeah, I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I loved what you said about the heroic journey of what we are becoming and how we are growing in our careers. So that was really good. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I hope this helps and, you know, gives you everyone a little bit of food for thought and a way to look at the chart, your own chart again in a new way, exploring a little further.
Yes, I have really liked the way that you have used all of the chart for the career and the purpose. I think it's in the patriarchy that we see that we have to leave part of ourselves at home and just be, you know, business oriented and just do like, you know, like the thing that needs to be doing. And I think by becoming into the age of Aquarius, or like, I mean, that we bring the whole being, you know, we bring the whole chart to really like be whole at work or in our career and in the things that we want to do. So,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
I also have to mention that Auris Asporta has been like one of my first reading about understanding the psychology of, you know, like the chart and all like the planets were working and stuff like that. He has been a favorite of mine too. So
Yeah. He's definitely one I always go back to.
Yes.
I really admire his work. Yeah, thank you. No, I really think it's, if we think of our chart as the wheel, I mean, it's the wheel of a carriage, you don't want anything broken. It's not going to move. So I might as well bring all of it in.
Yes. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Sue, you had something to say there?
I love your artwork, Vanessa. It's very expressive and very, it's beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. And thanks for sharing that during this Venus retrograde. So it's just been an amazing treat. It's so beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll wind down the meeting now. So I'll just unmute everybody. You can just say a thank you. And we'll see you again, Vanessa. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Vanessa.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.